Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Thursday, August 8th. Derek Van Riper, Eno Saris, Trevor May here with you. On this episode, we have a game plan segment. How do you hit Blake Snell? It's been very difficult since he came off the IL, of course, through a no-hitter 2 starts ago. Had a quality start on Wednesday night against the Nats. Just looks like a different guy now than he did earlier this year. His next matchup is going to be against Atlanta next week. So we'll talk about what the Braves hitters might do to try to prepare for Snell in his current state. We're going to talk about some pleasant surprises among hitters, some guys that have had great seasons so far. Try to figure out where we're going from here. Eno noticed that sinker usage is up again around the league, so we'll talk about why that might be the case. And we're going to take a look back at a new toy we were excited about a few months ago. We have StatCast bat tracking. We're going to look at bat speed risers from the first 2 months of the season to the second 2 months and see if there's anything we can pull out of that might be meaningful. Probably more questions than answers in that part of the show, but it's fun to look at those shiny new toys. Get some news as we get started today, gentlemen. The White Sox have dismissed manager Pedro Grifol. I like in soccer how it's the manager gets sacked. I prefer that terminology. I think I want to use that going forward. It just seems like a great way to say someone was let go. But Pedro Grifol no longer the manager of this brutal White Sox team. Simple question to start, Trevor. How do you evaluate a manager on any bad team? Because the outside looking in perspective I have is always they shouldn't be this bad. So perhaps there is something the manager could be doing differently. But you've been on some teams that have been less than great. So how do you evaluate a manager in those situations?
Well, a team like that going into the season, and I was in a very similar situation going into 2023 where a team we knew wasn't going to be great. It was always a question like, how far is the fall going to be before with the turnaround? Is that going to happen this year? And I think that's kind of what they were hoping for. Like, let's see if we can get some diamonds in the rough to kind of come out and be our core guys. Then we can start building on top of that again. And there's a lot of responsibility. I think there's more responsibility on a manager in those situations than there is when the team is pretty good or getting close, because you measure it a little bit differently. I think that we had a lot of conversations about, hey, we are not going to be, we need to not look at ourselves or evaluate ourselves based on, wins and losses at this point. That's just not where we're at. But it is, are we better now than we were 3 weeks ago? Like, are guys improving incrementally, and are we developing players? Because we're in a situation where we have to develop players in the big leagues. And I think that's where his failure may be glaring, because not only did they lose 21 games in a row, and it's I think almost brutal to fire a guy after he finally breaks the streak, and then he gets fired. They're like, oh, okay, that's over. Anyway, you need to leave. That sucks. But they've lost over 10 like 4 times in a row, and that's you can't stop the bleeding. That's that's not their philosophy. Get better than we were just a couple weeks ago, and I'd say they're getting worse. And that's not personnel wise. That's you can win games in the big leagues. I'm of the opinion that the difference in talent, like the from the best to the worst players, isn't as big as other sports. Like, any guy can be the hero any given day, and a lot of it comes to do, like, if you have really good processes, you can scrape together wins even if you don't have the best talent in the world. But if you don't have the best talent and you don't have that philosophy, that's when you get a team that's 30-90. It's almost hard to do. That's where I think ineptitude maybe shows a little bit more, and that's the messaging must not have been good. Like, you just got to call it what it is, and maybe there's pressure there, and like you got to kind of act like you just don't look at the elephant in the room. But when guys look at the elephant in the room and go, hey, this is the deal, let's just try to get better every single day. And if I end up not having a job at the end of the day, but this is me doing my best in this situation. And by all accounts, it doesn't sound like that's what it was. I think it was a kind of pie in the sky. Hey, we could be better than we look like we're going to be, but you have to develop. You don't have the guys with experience to do that, so you got to learn how to do it. And I don't think he was doing that.
Yeah, I think my general stance on managers is that they're kind of like vibes and personnel managers, that they are trying to keep a bunch of men in the same direction. But a lot of people think of managers as tacticians, and that the choice of when to take the pitcher out or what the lineup card looks like is most important thing that a manager does. And I think that might actually be the least important thing that a manager does. because a lot of those decisions are made in concert with the front office. And a lot of those decisions seem really important in retrospect. Oh man, that guy that you put 8th in the lineup went 4 for 4. If only you put him 2nd, they would have scored a bunch of runs. Yeah, that's not really how it works, And so,
yeah, good point, by the way. Had I known that, I would have done it too, right?
all right. And the same thing was like, oh, you took that guy out too early. Oh, but did I take the other guy out too late? It's like, it's a lot of ipso facto, like sort of backwards looking. Oh, the manager's an idiot because he didn't do these things that were obvious now, but weren't obvious at the time. But when I say that, I'm not trying to denigrate how important a manager is, because vibes and process and personnel are super important. They're just not something we see as much. And so my input, my best way of seeing this is like, I see Mark Kotze and I see the A's and I see them a lot. And I see David Force saying we do a lot of player development at the major league level. I see Mark Kotze answering questions in the scrum saying, we've asked Lawrence Butler to make a little adjustment with his head and to kind of keep his head more still in his swings, and we're asking him to make better swing decisions. So that's what he's working on. We've asked Zach Geloff now to make a big change to the way he swings the bat, and he's telling the media this to give the kids a little grace, right? So he's saying, yeah, Zach Geloff is hitting 196, but we've asked him to do something that's really hard to do. He's trying to change the way he swings a little bit. So give him a little time. And if he does come out of that, then you can say, well, a little self-servingly, yeah, Mark Kotze had an adjustment for him. I was just talking about him last week. And now look at him. He's hitting 300 in the last couple of weeks. But yes, that's what you're talking about, is like, getting better. And it seems to me that Mark Kotze has put into place some processes in terms of what we expect to see out of you. We expect to see better swing decisions. We expect to see damage at the plate, whatever it is, certain metrics they care about, certain processes they care about, and they're in place, and the team knows about it. He transmits that belief. He tells them that. But one question I have for you, Trevor, is what is your interaction? And keep it general. It doesn't have to be with Mark or any specific guy. But what is the average player's interaction with the manager? Like, what is it? It's not.
It's a two-pronged approach, right? Kotze is a very, I'll just use him as an example. He's a good example. He's a younger guy. Mm-hmm. It's not that long since he played. His door's open. Like, he's a very approachable guy. He wants to be approachable. That's very much on purpose, which I greatly respect. He also, the vibe I got was maybe a little bit of an experience in terms of that vibe stuff. Like, as a player, what kind of things can you, how much does the players want the manager to be involved with that? And that's a way crazy wide ranging thing. Like Buck Showalter was completely different than like Rocco Baldelli. Rocco's so laid back, just listening to the fish in his office, but it's open, the door's open, but like, he's not out here rah-rahing or like hanging out in guys' lockers that much. Buck was way more. So it's like, they want to show their personalities off. They want to meet you at a human level. And those guys are the best, in my opinion. But then there's players that like seek out hanging out with their manager a lot, like going and sitting there and like talking about the game and just like hanging out longer after the game and like, having dinner, and like the manager, there'll be the last couple guys there. Like Seth Brown's one of those guys. He's always, he likes to sit and shoot the breeze with his manager. Right. And Kotze likes doing that stuff. I'm a get in, get out. Like, that's not the way I am. But when it came to talking ball, like I was comfortable knocking on his door and be like, hey, Skip, I got a request to make. I remember going in there and being like, hey, when I came off the IL for the anxiety, being like, hey, if I could get like one outing with in low leverage or like no leverage, just one, I would, before we get into this thing, because I understand the nature of our bullpen and where we're at right now. He's like, absolutely. In that first outing, it was a situation where it was kind of leverage, and he's like, I tried. This is the least leverage. It was that, or you're going to sit out there for a few days. I was like, you know what, I appreciate that, but he was clear about it, and that was good. So at the end of the day, I think just being approachable is the number one thing you can have, and be as honest as you can. And when you can't be like, I can't give you a bunch of detail because of the nature of this business, just say that, and that's enough. And I think he's learning that really quickly. I'll be honest, there was times where I was like, I didn't know what was a Mark Kotsay decision and what wasn't. That gets frustrating a little bit. You don't know who to, like, if you don't agree with something and you don't know where it's coming from, like, it's hard to not be mad at everybody. So and that gets
a good manager is one that can alter, is approachable.
Yes.
Can alter his approach to fit a little bit what the player wants. And then I think the one thing that I get from Melvin a lot is just super honest. You know, just be like, you know, I'm taking accountability. I'm not trying to be like, oh, this was the pitching coach's decision, so yell at him. Like I take accountability. It was a decision of the coaching staff, but you know, you can still sort of subtly be like, you know, that was a full coaching staff decision, or was my decision, you know. So you can kind of read between the lines and understand, sort of see the organization's fault lines, because that's what they're representing, right?
That's a great way to put it, the organizational fault lines. And if everyone's willing to take accountability and overlap those things and take a little brunt from other people, I think that works the best. And I want to be very clear, players can clock coaches that kind of shrug off blame a little bit to other people.
That was the pitching coach's choice. Yeah, that was emo.
We immediately, because the first thing we are told, like the first thing you're told by every big leaguer when you get up there is be accountable. So like we have to be accountable all the time. We get really sensitive when it seems like people aren't. And same goes like umpires and stuff. That's why there's so much vitriol for that sometimes, because it's like we can't fathom not being accountable for everything you do, especially the longer you've been around. And that's just the
nature of the manager is that he's sort of at the middle of the front office and the coaching staff and the players,
up and down. Yes.
So he will be broadcasting a decision that will be a front office decision, or like, you know, he will be broadcasting a decision that came from his coaching staff, and so
he can't tell you most of the time specifically what it was, or he shouldn't, because it would have caused more problems than it actually
right. But so it's a difficult job.
It's a dance.
It's a difficult job. I mean, you want to broadcast honesty and accountability, but there are different ways to do it, you know?
And Mark has he's got other things going on that there's no other manager has to deal with
in terms of front office decisions and stuff.
Yeah, because then there's that dance between the ownership and the front office, which also might be a little muddy. So it's like he can't tell what's, you know, like he's also doing the same thing we're doing with him. And but it looks like, especially from last year, this year, it looks like that stuff is he's figuring it out a little bit. Like, okay, it's the best way to do this and make sure players feel like they're seen and they're heard and they know what they need. And it looks like to me like they're getting much more on the same page. But that's what happens when you give guys a few years to get it going, because it's a unique situation. So
yeah, and maybe Pedro just wasn't given enough time, but at the same time, yeah, and maybe there's some unique challenges there with ownership as well, and so on. But I haven't heard great stuff, and we're gonna hear more soon, I think. But you know, I haven't heard great stuff about the processes there, like in terms of, you know, the numbers the players are seeing, the preparation the players are getting. And that was part of the reason he was supposed to be there, to improve those processes.
Well, I'm curious to see. Grady Sizemore is going to be the interim manager. You know, if anything changes, if this team just looks a little bit better in the final 2 months, maybe there's a chance that the interim tag gets removed and they actually keep Grady around. I mean, the White Sox processes are so steeped in loyalty that ordinarily they have to go outside the organization. They have to start over with all these things. I don't think they necessarily have to do that because of all their past behaviors. But yeah, changes are slowly taking shape on the south side.
I did see a funny tweet about like, what would be the most ridiculous hire for them? Would it be Buck Showalter or Joe Madden? And I don't think that's the direction they're going. They're going to try and do something like you maybe have like Ollie Marmol in St. Louis, where they take somebody who's within the organization, understands the organizational values, and can grow into the job. Right. I mean, that was, I think, part of the idea with Pedro.
That's what it seemed like at the time they hired him. And I think just because it was a change from Tony La Russa, I thought this has to be better. And unfortunately, it didn't work out that way. But one more question for you guys before we get into the meat of today's show, the game plan against Blake Snell. I've been riveted by the Olympics in the brief moments when I've been able to focus on them. 2028, the Olympics are going to be in Los Angeles. Baseball's back. Will Major League Baseball find a way to let its players compete in the 2028 Olympics with the logistical tweaks of maybe moving up the start of spring training, breaking down the schedule, having a gap around the time the games will be played? What do you think the biggest hurdles are actually going to be, Trevor, for this to happen? Because it sounds like some of the superstars of the game want to be a part of this 4 years from now. And I would think from just sort of a global marketing opportunity, there would be a lot of interest within the group of owners to make this happen, because you would be getting baseball in front of a lot of people who don't get to see it very often, if they even get to see it at all.
It would be huge for growing the game, which seems to be an initiative for the MLB in a big way, which I am a huge fan of. I think they're doing a good job. I heard recently that there are rumblings of playing at the Bristol Speedway, putting a game in the middle of wherever. I don't know where you put it, but like that's
infield,
really
yeah.
If you can get 120,000 people into a thing, and I don't know how it works, but it's cool. It's just like outside the box thinking. I like that. The Olympics are one of the coolest things that I think humankind does. I think it's like there was Andy Anderson, the famous skateboarder who was said a comment to Tony Hawk recently that really hit me hard, and he said there's only a few reasons the world gets together, and it's like the UN, war, and the Olympics.
Yeah.
Wow, and only one of those is positive most of the time.
And he's the older skateboarder that is skateboarding in these Olympics against these like 14-year-olds.
Yeah, and he's a really unique guy, but that was one of the I'm like that makes it seem so much crazier. And then we also know how what the players said, especially last year with the emotional attachment. I felt like we had more emotional attachment, at least in the public eye, of the WBC players and the guys that are like, I'm so excited to play for my team. So if they can pull it off, they should, and it's in the United States. Like I feel like that's the planets aligning. You got to try to get it done. Now it depends, because obviously they do like sections of events in the Olympics where like people go, they compete for 10 days, then they leave, and then more events start and whatever. So when
like gymnastics was before track and field, and so most of the gymnastics is gone.
Yeah, gymnastics is over, and like the rugby team's been home for a week now. So like they would have to figure out what point of time, because it's the middle of summer. But then they could just do an extended. I don't know if you can play MLB games during the Olympics, and that's the interesting thing. Like, do you want teams playing without their best players at all, like in the season, because it matters? And then there's the injury concerns. But at the same time, like in my opinion, if someone gets hurt because they're in the Field of Dreams game, they run in the corner, they don't see something or something, like, then is that any worse or better?
It can happen at any time, really.
Yeah,
right.
Jeremy Affield tore his ACL picking up his kids. Like you can just that you can't worry about injuries. You just got to go play. And I think that the fun of baseball should happen. If they can get it done, they should definitely get it done, especially because a lot of the best players from all the different countries are already in the United States. So the travel, everything would be easy. Getting them there in one day would be easy. Getting them facilities would be easy, because California is full of baseball fields. They're everywhere. Like teams everyone could have their own facility to work out in. And it just lines up really well in that, like in the infrastructure and stuff. They need to do it. But it's the timing, like how much time do they need? And I'm not certain what that is, whether it's a week, if they could do the whole thing in a week, or if they need 2 weeks to do it. Then now we're, pool play.
That was
like qualifying, maybe off seasons, and then there is no pool play. You just go straight into bracket play. I don't know.
Yeah, that'd be interesting to switch pool play from bracket play. I like that idea. The discussion with Mark Hotze in the scrum this week or on Tuesday was the idea that it would be 2 weeks, and then how do we fit that into schedule? And if we make it the All-Star game, does the All-Star game just not have any All-Stars in it? Do we not have an All-Star game and have a 2-week All-Star break, which is the Olympics? So producer Brian says Affel also got hurt separating frozen burgers with a knife. So
Oh yeah, then there was Clint Barmas with the deer meat.
Yeah.
Pete Fairbanks dunked on his kid in a swimming pool and got hurt.
Blake Snell, I think, dropped a sink on his toe or something. Or
Yeah, a pedestal.
Will Smith pulling a shoe off towards Achilles.
Yeah, I mean, this stuff just happens. Life happens.
But 2 weeks is a lot. 2 weeks is a lot. I mean, because we do these things where we send them to the Seoul games, and the Seoul games, they're only 2 games themselves, but there's, it's kind of like 2 travel days before and 2 travel days after. It becomes basically a whole week. So if they could fit it into a week, I think it could really happen. And then maybe the way to do that is there's separate pool play in March. I mean, could they pull that off? But then the other teams have to send, people to, but a lot of them would be major leaguers that would be in America anyway for March. So
I think that'd be cool because you'd create some of that hype at the time that WBC normally happens. So you'd have that energy in the spring.
It'd be
that would build up more anticipation for what happens in the summer. And then I think, missing an all-star game for a year isn't the end of the world. You could maybe feature the futures game more that year because those guys won't necessarily be on the team. Like there's other ways to work around that.
To the Olympics somehow. Like there's probably a bunch of you can because there's revenue around the All-Star game, right? You can create a whole call it like the break, mid-season break or something, and it's got all kinds of interesting different kinds of baseball to consume. It's not like things just go away. But I think that just overall viewership wise, it'd be incredible. And it would be really cool to see, I don't know, like a Chinese Taipei team or like Taiwan or some like one of these teams like have some crazy, like stud pitcher who comes and just, gets them their win every time. Kind of like the Little League World Series works. I think we would get that same kind of vibe where we get to see some teams even that don't even get to go to the WBC. Which
because you'd probably have to do one and done. And if you do one and done, you could have 16 teams. If you just do the bracket play, that's 4 games.
Yeah, it's not too bad
per each for the team that plays the most.
Might have to be really limited in teams. So like qualifiers would be important, and then you could do regional qualifiers so the work to travel. I know that's not necessarily how they work, but
I can't do the math on the fly. But maybe if you only had 8 teams that made it or 16 teams that made it, and then you did. The way they do Little League here is like if you lose, you can lose once and you go into the losers bracket.
Yeah.
So you might be able to fit in, 6-7 games, do it in a week. I don't know. I'm not a schedule maker on the fly like that, but if it was 7, maybe even 10 days and you could fit it in, that'd be pretty cool. I just hope that somebody takes it seriously and thinks about it and tries to make it happen.
Yeah, would love to see it come together. We'll see what kinds of hurdles we run into in the next couple of years trying to iron out all the logistics to actually make it a reality. That game at Bristol has been confirmed. It's a Reds-Braves matchup. It's going to happen next season. And they did play a college football game at that track before. They put a field on the infield.
It was Virginia, right?
Yeah, it was a Tennessee-Virginia Tech game. 156,990 was the attendance, largest crowd ever to watch a college football game.
What are you seeing? If you got the 155,000th best seat in the house,
you know what? You're probably
there for the atmosphere.
You've probably taken care of a cooler of beverages before the game started, and you're not really that worried about how far away your seat is. You're just having a nice time out in the sun at Bristol. That's my guess as to what the vibe is like if you get the worst seat in the house for something like that.
Think about going to a NASCAR event. What are you seeing?
Yeah,
you see blurs.
At least the cars are bigger,
Oh, okay. So he's in last. Got it.
Yeah.
I've been to some races. I've been to IndyCar races before. I've been to 2 different tracks. The Milwaukee Mile, which is similar to NASCAR's in the sense that it's ovals, right? But then I've been to more of a road race style. There's a little track up in Elkhart Lake, Wisconsin that has a bunch of sharp turns and stuff on it. And there you can't see most of the track. You have to kind of pick your spot where you're going to be. So that's a totally different
It's
experience
interesting.
overall.
So if you have a good turn, like you're just rooting for the turn. You're just like, oh, look at that. There's one.
Yeah.
You can see all the different turn strategies, but you don't see what they do in the straightaways or whatever.
Yeah, one of the years I was there, they were coming right at us down a hill into the turn. You're like, man, I hope everything's working with braking. I just this
Yeah.
this is gonna be bad if it's not tuned up the way it needs to be. But I actually had a lot of fun at races. It's been a while. It's been more than 10 years. Highly recommend doing it at least once just for the experience. Let's get to our game plan segment. Let's talk about how you would prepare to face Blake Snell, the good version of Blake Snell, which is most of the time, right? The beginning of the season is really a relative outlier. And there was something Trevor brought up during our meeting yesterday that I hadn't picked up on. The big difference in terms of what's working for Blake Snell right now is off speed stuff early in counts, right? That's the thing he didn't have clicking earlier in the year. And I went back to, at the recommendation of all three of you, including our producer, Brian Smith, I went back and looked at some of the footage from the game against the Rockies on the 27th of July, the one where he had 30 swinging strikes. It was the start rate before the no-hitter. He was completely filthy that day. There's a sequence we're going to watch. It's on the screen right here. He starts with a curveball and a changeup before going 3 fastballs to Brent and Doyle. And it's just like he almost gets a swing on this first pitch down in the dirt, gets the changeup down and away. And then it's just all heat. Fastball up, fastball in that gets fouled off. Another fastball up above the top of the zone that actually finishes off that plate appearance for the strikeout. And it's interesting, too, because if you go back, that was the second time he faced Doyle in that game. The first matchup, he opened up with fastballs, and Doyle ripped a line drive to center field that Elliot Ramos misplayed that actually turned into a double. So all this is to say, this version of Blake Snell, when it's all clicking, what do you do? How do you begin to approach him to reduce his effectiveness against you? Because he's pitching like Cy Young Snell again here in the midpoint of the season.
I mean,
You go first,
yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I try to look at, for example, he's facing the Braves. I try to look at Braves against fastballs up, like Snell's. And I did a search for just lefty fastballs with as much ride as Snell has. And the most sample was 6. And I was like, did they face Blake Snell? And I think maybe the only other guy is Mackenzie Gore, maybe, so you're talking about, primo ride from a lefty like that, up in the zone, there's not too many guys who are like that. So I decided I'd rather open it up and look at guys who are just generally good at ride up in the zone. And Ozzie Albies is good at that, and Acuna is good at that, and that doesn't help the Braves on this particular Monday. So Marcell Ozuna is somebody that I keyed in on because Marcell Ozuna is a high ball hitter, and he's good at it. So these are all of the pitches that Blake Snell has thrown Marcell Ozuna. I think they've had 4 at bats. Marcell Ozuna has a homer. Blake Snell has a strikeout. There's a ball, there's a walk, and then there's a ball in play that was an out. So they they've split the difference so far. As you can see with the fastball, Snell still wants to go above in the zone, but I would venture that those balls that are so far up in the zone were never meant to be strikes, because I think he knows that Marcell Ozuna is a high ball hitter, so he doesn't really want to give him balls in the zone up there. And then otherwise, he's filling up the bottom of the zone with slider, curves, and changeups. And, I would say that this is a really, at least an obvious strategy, and that Ozuna, could just key in on the high fastball anyway and just spit on everything down. But the homer is on that changeup that's middle. You can see it's the little spot there, that little blue spot that's middle on the changeup. That's the homer. So Ozuna did a great job of being open to something soft that didn't get down enough while waiting and looking for a high fastball. And I think that's the challenge is, especially if you're a high ball hitter, you do want to get that high fastball, but he could just try to fill up the zone with you with curves on the inside back foot corner, change ups in the zone. But as you can see, this is a tough matchup for Blake Snell. This will be the toughest matchup he has on Monday, I think.
It's interesting. Okay, so I have done a lot of thinking about Blake Snell and also discussed with him about what he's trying to do a lot. And so there's a few things you should know about Blake. We talked about tunneling and like picking a tunnel and throwing off that tunnel. Blake is very much one of those guys. He is a Tampa Bay Ray. So you got to remember that he was one of the first guys they talked to about this. He throws a very, very good riding four seam, one of the best in the league. I think that last one you showed with Doyle said 10 inches of drop, which is like 22 inches of ride, according to True Media. So like that's tops of the league. Like there's only a couple guys that are even with him regularly at all. So he throws his four seam. It's up and into righties, up and away to lefties. This is the same spot. So that's his tunnel. So he throws his curveball, which is the opposite of that. It goes straight down off of that. He throws the slider off of that. That ends up a little bit more into righties, but he throws it off of it. So like where he throws his breaking pitches, so where they're spotted, if they're slightly in the zone, that means they tunnel off his fastball. Well, if they're out of the zone, he didn't tunnel. So early in the year, he wasn't throwing them off the pitch. So they look different. And he wasn't commanding it very well. And he was also just guys weren't chasing. He's dependent on chasing.
So that's when the difference between his high fastball and his low breaking ball is just easier to discern.
It's easier to discern. They're taking his breaking ball more, but when he's throwing his fast or slight curveball a little bit up earlier in counts, like you said, throwing one early in the strike zone, close to the zone where guys think about swinging at it or like, oh wow, that was close. Then now his fastball's open and he's got one of the best ride fastballs and he throws 97. So good luck. So as long as he's tunneling there, he's fine. Like there is no like, there's no identifying a pitch and going off it if they're tunneling that. The stuff's too good. So what you need to do with Blake Snell is look for patterns, and he has them. So this is when he gets in trouble. This is when guys are giving him a little bit of the fits. Here's some pretty glaring stuff. What I did was I went and just I have a opposing pitching report, and it just tells me what his usage is in each count to the different guys on the side of the plate. And it's pretty glaring. So he has a couple things. When he is in a mid count or behind, he is comfortable throwing his slider for a strike to lefties and his changeup for a strike to righties. That's what he goes to. The usage of those two pitches is far and away the highest in the middle counts. And
he doesn't bury the change. Is something I've noticed. It's a change for strikes. It's a change for strikes. He's trying to throw it a little bit higher.
So that's I throw this for strikes pitch. Early in the year, he only had his fastball and he only had his changeup that he could throw in the strike zone. That is his first best pitch and his fourth best pitch. And he was a 2-pitch pitcher with those two pitches. That's why he was getting hit like he was getting hit. Now he's got his curveball back. The chase in the curveball is crazy, but this is why. 0-2 to righties, 61% curveballs, not a single slider on the year. So, and it's like 33% fastball. So it's 94% fastball or curveball with two strikes to a righty. To lefties, it's like 45% slider, 10% curveball, and the rest is fastball. So he goes slider to lefties for the swing and miss, curveball to righties over half of the time. So if I am one of those two guys, I'm like, I know this. He goes to a 2-pitch pitcher depending on where you are in the count.
And if it's 60%, I'm sitting curveball with two strikes.
2-0 to a righty, 2-0, 61% changeup.
That's where Marcell Ozuna was probably sitting change in that count and saw that.
I'll never forget this. This was in 2019. CJ Crone, who is listed here as one of the guys who has some success against Blake Snell. The way he gets ready for pitchers this is what he looks at. He looks at what are your glaring patterns. I'm going to sit on a pitch and a count, and he's gotten him 3 times. So that year, at that point, it was like June, and Blake was 100% changeup 2-0 to righties. So he sat 2-0, got 2 on him, threw him, took him deep. And I'm like, what do you, dude? You can't be 100%. Like that's
how much of that's on Bailey? Should Bailey be just calling something else?
I mean, it doesn't matter if Blake Snell
might just shake him off,
which is what he's doing. So he's showing you very clearly. If you go look, if I'm a hitter, I'm going to look. If he's throwing this type of percentages, that's a comfort thing. He's comfortable doing that. Why is he comfortable? That means he's not comfortable doing something else. And his fastball's the thing he's most comfortable with. So instead of guessing which north or south it is, just try to pick one that you think you're confident on the 60% if you get in these counts, and then know what pitches he's using mid counts more often than not. And you can eliminate a pitch. You can turn him into a 2-pitch pitcher based on the count. And I think that's when he gets in trouble, when guys when his stuff isn't really elite that day, maybe it's just like a little bit diminished. He's a little tired. He's still really good, but he's a little tired. He's not commanding as well. And he starts getting guys are fighting off pitches. He's staying in those patterns. So they're getting more confident in making the decisions on, I'm guessing 1 or 2 pitches, I can get him. And then you got to try to get him for a homer. And that is one thing that the Braves are going to try to probably do. And Ozuna is probably your best option because he naturally can hit his stuff a little bit better than other people's. So like Austin Riley, right? He's going to get heaters up and he's going to get curveballs below the zone. What Austin Riley needs to do is try to get him, because he'll throw a slider every once in a while, try to get a slider mid count because he can drop the head on that. That's his best pitch to hit from him, or sit on a changeup in like a 2-0 count. Like if you get one of those, that's what Austin Riley's going to try to do, and just foul everything else off. And that's how they're going to approach him. But he's one of those guys, like if he's dialed in and he's hitting every single spot, you have to sell out and just try to get him for like a 2-run homer after a walk or something. Like that's your best option. But he's got some of the most glaring patterns, and he always has. Though it is better this year. It was worse earlier in the year, and it's getting more. Like he's willing to take more chances, but he sticks with the best stuff. And within that one tunnel, and every single target is that up pitch. So just know everything's going to look like it's up here. And if he's dialed in, it's going to look like it's a strike. And based on what the count is, if you know which 2 pitches he's using in that count, maybe you can adjust your swing to get a good swing on one of the pitches, guess right, whatever. And if he's not going really well, you might be able to get him to throw a lot of pitches. That's how you beat Blake Snell.
And I think, hitters don't really want to admit this. And I think one of the problems is the word guess has these connotations that like, oh, you can't see the ball and you're just guessing out there. And,
yeah.
But another way you can say it is anticipation. And a lot of the swing is a lot of the way I see the swing is yes, yes, no. Right. And so you kind of, in order to catch up to the biggest heat, you do have to start, with the pitcher. You have to be yes, yes, yes. And then what I think really helps is if you have you anticipate a certain type of pitch and you're yes, yes, yes. And then off of that, right? So you either hold up or you check your swing, right? You see that so often. And I think that's the hitter saying, that wasn't the pitch I guessed, or that wasn't the pitcher I anticipated, that wasn't the pitch I anticipated. And so I stopped my swing, and so I think a lot of the sort of right now with pitchers, really not only optimizing their stuff, but now optimizing their arsenals where I have 3 fastballs, I have this. I think it's more important than ever to kind of play along with the pitcher and try to anticipate something and match the right swing because you might have like 2 or 3 swings in your pocket that you can use against his 2 or 3 pitches. And so you have to kind of anticipate and be like, well, I think it's going to be sinker in. I'm going to do my scoop swing, and so I have to do my scoop swing. Here's my scoop swing. Yes, yes, yes. Oh no, it was a 4-seam. Nope. Try to check, And so that's the sort of, you can call it guessing, but guessing makes it sound bad. That's the only thing I was going to push back about. And also, Jared Kelenic is a high ball hitter. And so you might say, well, he matches up well against Sale, but he's a lefty. And so those percentages that you brought up make it harder for him to anticipate something. You even brought up, 2-0 counts. Or 0-2 counts, where it's like, oh, well, with lefties, it's kind of 30-30-30. But with righties, it's 60-30, So the lefty already is like, crap, it could be slider, fastball. It could be, it could be slider, fastball, or curve. It could be any of 3 pitches. Whereas, the righty can say, man, this 2/3 of the time, it's going to be this one pitch. And anytime you see any percentage, and I think you've said this before, anytime you see a percentage past 60%, you're opening yourself up for hitters sitting on
green light for everybody. Like that, those numbers are glaring in the major leagues. A great example of what you just talked about, by the way, if anyone wants to go back and watch this, I went to the Mariners game last night, and catcher Rogers, handlebar mustache of the Tigers.
Jake Rogers.
Jake Rogers got Kirby on a 4-seam up like 3 inches above the zone. Not a pitch he hits. He cannot. Yeah. It was the flattest swing I've ever seen him take by far. Like he was so excited. He's like, I did it. Like I guess I did it and I got him. And it was 95. It wasn't his best fastball either. And that was a prime example of a guy. He probably won't do it again all year, but he did it. He was confident, and the usage of the 4-seam fastball that day for Kirby was really high. He was going up for everybody. So he just took a shot and it worked out. Right. So
did you say it was he said it was outside the zone too?
Oh, was outside the zone. It's way up. Kirby was like, what the? And
That's
he,
interesting because I had a piece come out today where I talk about with Kirby the fact that he had to go further outside the zone. He was kind of too in the zone with 2 strikes. And when I looked at the heat maps, his aggression has all been above the zone. So he is less in the zone, but in a sort of maybe predictable way. It's all like kind of above the zone. So Jake Rogers, they have advanced scouting that can say, hey, when he gets 2 strikes now, it's not really in the zone much. It's like 2 or 3 inches above the zone. So Jake Rogers is like, ooh, it's 2 strikes. This is gonna be a fastball 2 or 3 inches above the zone. I'm gonna put my best swing on this guy.
We got it.
Yeah.
Good example.
Yeah, it's just one thing you mentioned kind of at the beginning of this, is just like with no Acuna and no Albies in particular, it takes a tough matchup for the Braves against Snell and makes it a lot harder, right? I mean, that's 2 very important bats that in this particular spot would have been really helpful. But yeah, some of the guys most of the guys that hit him well, they're all righties, right? Gary Sanchez has 5 homers against him. Nobody else has more. Altuve and Bregman hit him well. Pete Alonso's hit him well. Jonathan Daza.
Pete Alonso's a high ball hitter. Pete Alonso's a high ball hitter.
Yeah.
And
a low ball hitter. Off speed wise, he can go way down there. But yeah, he is.
I mean, I think I think Pete Alonso, if you were going to grow an opponent for Blake Snell in the lab, it would be Pete Alonso. Somebody who's comfortable with the high fastball and the low breaking ball in, has that ability, like has the natural ability to touch the fastball and has developed over time, a response to the kind of the back foot slider, And
that's why Crone's good too. Crone's really good on the back foot slider.
So one thing that's always weird about the batter versus pitcher stats is that they don't mean much. They're not predictive because the samples are so small and they're usually stretched out over several years, right? I mean, you see some guys a lot more if they're in your division, you're both there for a long time, you get those larger samples. Even then, you're talking 30 to 40 plate appearances, usually at the high end. I wonder, what would be the best matchups you can conceive of if we somehow had a simulation, but like a real actual attempt to do it where a guy has to face someone like 100 times in a season. Like what are the dream matchups of great hitter versus great pitcher that would just be absolute battles throughout?
Do you know what Mike Petriello tweeted the other day? He said that Ted Williams faced 74 pitchers in one season and that last season Mookie Betts faced 295.
That's a big difference.
So
the game has changed.
That's just sort of a little side note to what you're saying. It's like, yeah, if we went back to like 1910 when like you might have actually only seen 50 pitchers all year.
Yeah, but who did Babe Ruth hit the most homers off of? I want to know that one. I bet you
off one guy. Ton off of one guy.
Stathead search will be done momentarily, but let's get to some pleasant surprises. It was Brenton Doyle in that particular clip against Blake Snell that we looked at earlier. I'm surprised that Brenton Doyle has improved this much from year one, mostly in his strikeout rate, right? It's a 35% K rate when he debuted last year. Small school guy. It's an organization that I don't have a lot of faith in, but to see him striking out 26% of the time this year and juicing up the barrel rate too, Brenton Doyle looks like a 30-30 guy who can play gold glove defense in center field. Like this is a great development for the Rockies. And I'm trying to learn from my mistakes. Like, why did I underestimate Brenton Doyle in a way that is like a repeatable mistake? Or did I get torched by an outlier who's doing some extraordinary things to get this K rate down to such a manageable level so quickly?
Yeah, I didn't see this coming. And I guess one thing is that like last year, the 17.5% swinging strike rate that did line up with what he'd done in the high minors. You just don't expect that person to make a lot of contact. 17.5 and higher, in this year is Alex Jackson, Matt Wallner, Trey Cabbage, Florial, Kyle Stowers, Gabriel Arias, guys who were striking out more than 30% of the time. Some of these guys striking out 40% of the time. But another guy who doesn't strike out as much as you'd expect, given even that high of one, is Ezekiel Tovar. And I do think that on some level, what we're seeing is that Coors can help you make the most of your your balls in play, and it can even help you maybe make more contact over time because you're going to see more fastballs at home. And if you can sort of figure out how to have a fastball approach at home and a breaking ball approach on the road, then I think you can improve. But I also just wonder what's going to happen in the future, because Doyle sported 30+% strikeout rates in the minors all the way along the way. And there's some other guys we'll talk about here where the K rate kind of jumped around a little bit. So you can say, oh, maybe this is a developmental thing. For Doyle, it seems almost like maybe he's being a little lucky on strikeout rate, which is not what numbers suggest. So they suggest 450 plate appearances into the season that you actually know a lot about a strikeout rate. I'm saying maybe we don't. Maybe this is going to come back to earth, and it'll come back to earth when it comes to contact.
Yeah, those minor league rates and his age to level were part of the reason why I wrote off the possibility of an improvement like this. Like, sure, if he shaved 2 or 3 percentage points off of what he did last year, okay, that's
32% now.
Right. That's kind of like where my head tends to go, because that's usually more in line with what we see. But what do you make of Brenton Doyle, Trevor? How did he make this much of an improvement from year 1 to year 2?
Well, I'm looking at which pitches he's handling the best this year. And last year he was a -3 run value on sinkers. This year he has a +10.
Jeez.
So we're going to talk about this a little bit next, but there has been a rise in sinker usage. It's been notorious. This was one of the first things that was in the conversation about Coors, about how sinkers are terrible there. And guys who throw sinkers going there basically go there to die. Rest in peace, Kyle Kendrick. So it's that type of, like, that might be guys are adding that wrinkle, going to Colorado, trying to throw it more, and he's crushing them. And he hit sliders fairly well as well, but better than he did last year as well. That might be the big adjustment he's made. But I think that possibly the things that makes him most successful, the types of pitches that he wants to see located where he wants them in the zone. He's getting more now because of the way the pitching has changed, and maybe he's just gotten to take advantage of that just a few more times. That has given us that little bit of an adjustment. But generally, all pitches, pretty much across the board, he's down about 3% in whiff percent. So that's also tells me that he's getting a better understanding of what he handles the best and how to spoil things that he doesn't that are in the zone also. And again, like, he would only need to do that just like every once in a while, like spoil a pitch that he was missing before, and then getting another one and putting it in play. That would change this strikeout rate in a big way. He's just fouled off one more pitch that he wouldn't have fouled off before slightly, and then he gets to make contact that he didn't get to make, and that would attribute a lot to that percentage as well. But in terms of his production, I think that he's just hitting the pitches that he can handle the best really, really, really well, and that doesn't scream that doesn't scream lucky to me. That screams like an adjustment to approach. But I don't think he's ever going to be like a 15% strikeout guy. But all he needs to be is a 25% strikeout guy, because he's that good defensively and he can run, and he just needs to get on base.
Something that'll be true of
right here.
It's something that'll be true of a lot of the other guys that we talk about, and is true about Doyle, that I like, is that the defense is really good. And, we've seen, there's a bit of this is younger Paul DeJong, but, there was a time at which Paul DeJong and Tim Anderson had like the worst walk to strikeout ratios of like all time. Like they like, I made a list once where I was like, can you have a 10-to-1 K to walk ratio and like be a major leaguer? And Paul DeJong and Tim Anderson at some point, like, were very close to that. And I was like, oh, so you can in today's league if you also hit for power and play defense, right? So, maybe the strikeout rate, we can disagree a little bit on where that's going, but with plus defense, with a modicum of on-base ability, and with plus base running, it's sort of a tent pole that keeps everything alive, even while he maybe slumps with the bat. And so I do think he'll continue to be a regular. I don't know exactly what the strikeout rate and therefore the batting average are going to do, but if you're just asking for him to hit for power, steal some bases, and play excellent defense in center, those things I believe in. And I think we've seen enough of those to believe in those. And it's sort of the younger Paul DeJong stayed on the field for a lot of these same reasons, playing great shortstop, doing all the things except necessarily maybe walks and strikeouts, doing them really well.
I think it's a lot easier to improve if you're getting regular run as opposed to getting 2 or 3 starts a week. I think it's just so much more difficult to problem solve big league pitching in a situation like that. So that's where the value of defense in fantasy in that roundabout way always comes back. If your glove buys you everyday playing time, that's a great thing. Projections, not surprisingly, basically split the difference between last year's K rate and the current one. So that's where I think most people are going to try and value Doyle going into 2025. I might, depending on how aggressively people are drafting him, I might actually be more in than out, even at the significantly increased price. By the way, you asked earlier, who did Babe Ruth homer the most off of? Stathead says Rube Wahlberg. 17 career home runs off of Rube Wahlberg.
Total Rube.
You got 14 off of Hooks Doss also.
What?
What a great name. Names were just better. Like they were just better.
Short nicknames. Everyone went by nicknames too. Like Rube's short for Ruben, I'm sure. And Hook, I have no idea. But
probably just like William Henry, just used to be Hook for some reason because off season was a great fisherman or something. I have no idea. There's usually a story.
Right. Yes, that's probably exactly what it is.
Someone's going to look at him and be like, yes, correct. Let's talk about Tyler Fitzgerald for a minute. On an 8 WAR pace through 53 games now, it's like 36 homers and 21 steals. The strikeout rate flirts with 30%. I don't want to make the same stupid mistake I just made with Brent and Doyle this year with Tyler Fitzgerald this season, right? That's totally possible. What is happening here? Has he unlocked something that makes him a kind of a key core piece for a Giants team that's been looking for an answer at shortstop?
Yeah, I'm close to this one and been watching him for a while, and he's athletic for sure. And I'm not suggesting these all tools and without baseball IQ, but he's been also moved all over. So he was center field and third base and shortstop. And some of that's the Giants' philosophy of just making people play all over the place. But some of that for me was that I didn't think he was a natural shortstop. And I also know that the Giants pretty much are desperate for a shortstop. So I'm not sure that he has the exact same sort of defensive acumen that I'm going to ascribe to Doyle. And another thing that Doyle has that Fitzgerald doesn't have is top end exit velocities that match his barrel rates. So right now you've got Tyler Fitzgerald sporting a 13% barrel rate, which is excellent. And that supports, his crazy home run barrage. And it's a good number. But then you pair that with a 107 max EV, even if you go down to the minors, 109.5. That's Bryson Stott territory. And if you just, whatever you think of Bryson Stott's pure power, put that up against Tyler Fitzgerald's 20 home runs in 250 plate appearances across AAA and the majors this year. And so there's a bit of a disconnect between his raw power and his game power. Maybe he's just a guy who gets to his game power really well. Maybe he has good game plans. I do respect heavily the Giants' approach to, game day preparation. Their tech is bar none basically. And so, they're hitting off the trajectory and so on and so forth. So I think, maybe there's going to be some disconnect between game power and raw power, but that's the thing that I think is most interesting. Yes, he's also going to strike out a lot, but if he is going to hit 25 homers a year, then, he's a little bit more viable as a shortstop that may only have a 300 OBP, and may not be the very best defensive shortstop, but he has 25 homers and 15, 20 steals and looks generally fine out there, and will play shortstop for them for 3 or 4 years. That's an outcome I can get to, but the question for me is the power, which is weird to say about a guy who just hit a ton of homers. But I think there's still guys can hit a bunch of homers in a short stretch and then go quiet for a while.
He is nice and pull happy, though. So as far as getting the less than ideal raw power to play up a bit more,
that's the best place to go in San Francisco too, for sure.
Yeah, that's definitely going to help. 99th percentile in sprint speeds too. So a burner that if the power were to slip a little bit, maybe you come back and add some bags too. So I think a lot of ways for him to be really good from a fantasy perspective. But Yeah, nice pop-up guy. I mean, at 26 to find this is a nice surprise for the Giants. Trevor, do you have anybody that's kind of caught your eye that has just stepped forward in an unexpected way this year? There's plenty of candidates out there. I mean, Josh Smith for the Rangers is a popular one, but who's really caught your eye this year and surprised you?
Josh Smith's a good one. I don't want to say surprise per se, though there is a little bit of surprise because it was a kind of a repeat and a build on from last year after the beginning of their career, Brent Rooker. But I've had lots of conversations with Rook about approach. Like, this is all stuff that he is very interested in. I see a lot of parallels between us and just where our interests lie and how to make decisions and how to be prepared. He's a really smart dude. But the one thing that's so impressive is that he's better now than he was last year for his All-Star campaign, in my opinion. And he's like a top maybe 8 production hitter overall in the major leagues. And nobody's really talking. And he's been there for a while. He's been there all year, and he was there for most of last year. So to have a mid 900s OPS for this long in that stadium is rare, hard to do, and they do not have guys that do that regularly or ever. I'm thinking like Jason Giambi. Like we like, this is that type of production. So it's been very impressive, and it's sustainable in my opinion, because he's increased his walk rate, reduced his strikeout rate year over year. His hard hit rate has stayed the same or gotten better. He has improved his run values against the pitches that he's notoriously struggled against, to the point where they're not quite liabilities as much anymore. He's not great at hitting them, but they're not liabilities. Like, he's taking away holes, or at least confidence pitchers throw them there. So he's doing a lot of things that I think are sustainable. And then he's an older guy, later bloomer, and it's just awesome to see him getting these opportunities. But I think that he would hit in the middle of most lineups. He might have to hit 4th for the Yankees, but everywhere else, he's like, in terms of just general production, like, he's up there with like Bobby Witt and Gunnar Henderson. Like, in overall, like, yeah, he doesn't run like them. I get that. He's not defensive like them, but hitting, he's up there with the guys we're talking about for MVP. So doing this for 2 years is very, very hard. A lot of guys that do flash in the pan for 1 year and then they come back down to earth. He has not. And that, especially with the protection he's had in that lineup the whole time, it's even more impressive. So Brent Rooker.
Yeah, he does remind me of you. He's very curious.
Very curious.
And last time I was in the clubhouse, so two times ago I was in the clubhouse, and he stumped me with 2 questions about StatCast stats that I was like, I don't know what that is. And I had to go and do some research and come back to him to answer his question. I mean, one we both agreed was maybe not super valuable, but the adjusted exit velocity on StatCast, he was like, what is this? And we're looking at it. It says average of 88. And we're just like, what's this 88? What is going on here? And we thought maybe the 88 was the pitch velocity coming in. It was like adjusted for pitch velocity. I talked to Mike Petriello, and it's basically takes every exit velocity over 88 and averages it, so that you remove the noise of all the sort of squib hits and the useless 50 mile an hour, 40 mile an hour, whatever those apparently those bad balls have less signal in them. They don't mean much. They just mean you've made a bad swing. It was a check swing, whatever it was. It wasn't a real swing. So once you get to 88 and over, you start to get a little bit more signal, and you get to, but he knows, when I was talking about bat speed, he's like, yeah, I called up the guys at Driveline and talked to them about bat speed for a while. So like, he's very inquisitive. He wants to know how to make the most. And I think, on some level he has to be, because he has to make the most of a less time in the big leagues, because of, the way that his career on-ramped. So, and I think that's maybe true for Trevor too. It's like, when you see your career span and you're like, I only have this many years, one more year could mean, $7-10 million more dollars. You should be inquisitive. Like, that's why sometimes I want to shake the young guys that are like, I don't look at that stuff. You're like, dude, like, you don't have that long to make this money. Like, you have very short careers.
Inquisitive. I am certain that they're going to stick. Literally, I think it's the number one number one tool for me. If I meet a guy and he's super curious about why does that happen? Oh, why is he throwing that to me? Why is it? If you are really good at asking why, you make adjustments faster than other people. And the longer you do it, the faster you get. And before you know it, you are maximizing your own talent. And then you just hit a ceiling where, you're not physically good enough. That's one thing I am happy with my career, especially at the end. I was like, I think that I maximized my stuff
the time
finally
I had
last year. Like, this is what I have, and this is as good as I could be doing. Had I had more time, I think overall it looked better. But like, I am doing the best version of myself right now, and that is the goal. And then you get kind of bored. Then you're like, well, now what? You're like, there's no more problems. So, or not no more.
Yeah.
problems.
So I think the Rooker's also a really great influence. Tommy Pham's like this. I've always, liked him for that. Rooker's like that, and both of them sort of proselytize a little bit. So like, they'll just be, they're just hanging out on the couches. It's not like he's sitting there being like, oh, and you shall read this and do this, but he's like, Rooker's the guy in the clubhouse, and so there's a bunch of couches right around him, and Geloff and Butler are always hanging out there. And, a lot of times I've gotten in the middle of the conversation where we're talking about, is the ball juiced, or, how important is bat speed? I'll start a conversation and Geloff will chime in, and Rooker's leading the conversation because he's asking me questions, And so that's a really fun, when you have a dynamic like that, that's good. And that's why I do believe in Geloff, fixing things, because
I agree too.
I think that Rooker's going to, shine off on the right.
So there's something we stumbled into when we were looking at Rooker during our meeting this week, and he destroys sinkers. And this came up with Doyle now too, where if the league is making this broader adjustment, if sinker usage ticks up around the league like it has this season, some players end up just being in a situation where they see something they can crush a bit more often. And that seems to make a pretty big difference when that's maybe the best pitch that you hit. So what has led to the slight uptick, the resurgence in sinker usage this season,
I mean, I think mostly it's the fact that, the less you use a pitch, the more it surprises people and the more it starts to do well. And so if you look at sort of the history of how well batters have done against the sinker, I think in, 2008, 2009, people were pounding the sinker because there was still a little bit of the vestige of, I'm going to establish low and away with the sinker. And then, over the next few years, you have the rise of the four-seamer. And as the four-seamer goes, becomes more prevalent, and the sinker since 2008, we're just using it less and less and less and less and less and less. You start to see the sinkers on the left are A, good sinkers. And so you're not throwing any mediocre sinkers. And B, the people who are throwing sinkers are surprising people with it. So in 2022, it really hit a bottom point in terms of batter production against the sinker. And I think that, pitching coaches were like, geez, if it's going to return that kind of return on my investment in terms of, I throw the sinker, I get a 340 WOBA on average. That's a lot different than when it used to do a 370 WOBA, so I'm cool with this. Let's throw some sinkers. And then on top of that, just what we've all been talking on this show and I've written about, and, the diversification of your portfolio, there is throwing your best pitches the most often, but then there is also, hey, I have 3 fastballs, so I can throw a sinker to righty, a cutter to lefties, and the four-seamer at any time. And then as a batter, you're like, crap, I put my four-seam swing and I got a cutter and I just pounded it into the ground, or I put my four-seam swing on it, I got a sinker, pounded in the ground, or I put my sinker swing on the four-seam and then I hit a pop-up, so matching your swing plane to the fastball that you're trying to time to is a lot harder if you have multiple fastballs. So I think this sinker usage, there's not necessarily a lot of people upping, not a lot of sinker dominant people being like, I'm going to throw the sinker more often, because we know that fastball usage across baseball is going down. It's more people adding a sinker, and starting to throw sinkers. It's like the Tyler Glasnow situation. Tyler Glasnow, dominant four-seam curveball slider. He starts throwing a sinker so that batters who are trying to key, especially righty batters who are trying to key in on the four-seam, oh, crap, that ball just had 7 inches more run towards me than I expected. So you put the four-seam swing on the sinker, it's 7 inches closer to your handle than you expect.
Yeah.
And so it's playing with the different pitches. And what you'll see, I just did a quick search in terms of being superlative against both sinkers and four seams. You'll see guys actually prefer one or the other in terms of being superlative against both sinkers and four seamers. And I'm going to say superlative is a 5-run value or higher. You only have Juan Soto, Bobby Witt Jr., Aaron Judge, Shohei Ohtani, the best in the game, Brent Rooker, who's still a little bit more towards the sinker, Ellie De La Cruz, and then you really not too many. CJ Abrams, Brian Reynolds, Kyle Schwarber, and that's pretty much the end of the list. Those are all the guys who are superlative against both sinkers and four seams. And a lot of times it just causes you to be better. You have a swing that aligns better with one of those fastballs, and you just try to avoid the other one.
Exactly.
To be able to do both says you have an adjustable bat. You can hit the ball hard, you can time to the fastball, and you have a four seam and a sinker sinker swing. So you can do something against both.
Right the first time, but
it didn't sound right.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing too is I think back to the beginning of that chart, like 08, 09, 2010. I think of guys like Justin Masterson who were out there just trying to throw heavy sinkers, trying to just get guys to pound the ball on the ground repeatedly. That's just pretty much gone. There are very few guys that try and pitch that way now. It's just not the way
most people have a scoop swing, and I think what we've had is you had the scoop swing, then you started adding the flat swing, for the four seam. And then as people were like, oh, I have a flat swing, now you're bringing the sinker back to be like, oh, do you also have a scoop swing? And it's kind of hard to have both.
Let's connect the dots with the very last thing for today. Bat speed changes in season. We were looking for notable changes. And this is a really odd thing to be looking at because we don't have past seasons. We just have the current season. So we tried to slice it in half and, put together a board of bat speed risers. I was wondering if Gavin Lux would appear on the list because he is swinging the bat a little bit harder, but nope, he's not among the
But he's
top 15.
just off. He's like 23rd or something. So he's among these guys. He's just not having to be in the top 15.
Yeah. So I looked at some results for these players. The thing that I saw pretty consistently for anybody that was in this group adding, 1.5 miles per hour to their average swing speed from the first 2 months to the last 2 months, K rates were down. WRC pluses were up. The only exception I think I saw was Bryson Stott. That's not surprising.
And yet Bryson Stott yesterday just hit the hardest hit ball of his career. Now it was 109.9, which is not necessarily impressive, but it was the hardest hit ball of his career. And I think, I did the same thing where it's not obvious, like batting averages aren't up for all these guys. And, it's a lot of slugging. A lot of slugging is up for these guys. And what you'll see is top end exit velos. Like, for Nolan Arenado, who, this is a huge swing for him and really important for him because he was really flagging on the bat speed. For him to add 2.4, and then you look at the results numbers, you might say, well, these aren't that great before and after. What is better is the slugging percentage and the exit velocities. And when you have a hard hit rate that jumps by like 10 percentage points, it may not turn into results right away, but I do think that this is good news for most of the people on this list. I can't imagine that I would say this is bad news for these guys, even if maybe their batting average is down in the sample. Luis Campusano makes tons of contact. If he pairs tons of contact with better contact, with like better exit velocities on that contact, then it doesn't matter how much he walks. You know what I mean? Then he can just be a guy who hits 20 homers and hits 260 and has like a 310 OBP. That's a great outcome for a catcher. And then Jaron Duran, who's just an exciting, blossoming young player, for him to add this component of elite bat speed to the foot speed that he has, to all the entire package that he has, on this list, if there is a future MVP that isn't obvious, like Yordan Alvarez could be a future MVP, I think Jaron Duran is another name on this list that someday could be an MVP.
Yeah, he's one of those guys that where he was drafted, he's been an exceptional value. He's been almost like a first-round fantasy guy that went in the 12th round of drafts this year, and the increasing bat speed's a great sign to see from him. Trevor, one thing we did when exit velo became kind of a new thing we could all see was we wondered if looking at it as like a rolling chart would give us some insight as to players who might just be hurt, right? I think that's something Eno presented at a First Pitch Arizona conference a long time back, where you'd see this dip and say, okay, what was going on there? Maybe you get a chance to talk to the player. Yep, hurt my shoulder. Got hit by a pitch. You'd find some things that kind of explained the fluctuations. What types of explanations could there be for bat speeds maybe rising and falling over the course of the year? Because my suspicion is if we look at something like this mapped out on a rolling graph, once we have those available, we're going to see some ebbs and flows. But like, what would cause those changes to happen that are kind of normal baseball things?
Injuries are one, big time, especially like, we don't think about how getting jammed can affect you. You can bruise your palm or something. They're dealing with stuff like that constantly. And so you're a little more tentative. That'll just kill your bat speed. And then inversely, it might go up because you're most confident with you found something, and now you're swinging with gusto at that pitch.
So some mechanics, like a mechanical thing, even
there might be a mechanical thing. It could be any of those things. And the interesting thing for me is going to be, I think the highest value is going to be seeing the rolling average, especially when they get swing speed stats for like every game over game, and you're able to see trends and then map it to what you're feeling and map it to the types of things that are happening on the field. And maybe you're looking for something like, why am I mishitting everything? And then you could start with, okay, bat speed's now one of the places you can calibrate your compass with to point you in the right direction to possibly there. So I think that's going to be the biggest value. And then pitchers, conversely, are going to also see things like this and be like, maybe there's something going on here. Slower bat speed, maybe me susceptible to fastballs. Let me look into that. The crazy thing for me too to remember, and I just really want to touch on Arenado really quickly, is increased bat speed. And he's been publicly said, I'm trying to increase it. As soon as that came out as a stat, it's not surprising at all that he's like, ooh, interesting. I don't want to be below average. I want to be above average. What that does is his swing is getting a little bit bigger. Now where his barrel at is in time is different than he is naturally used to.
He has to make another adjustment.
So now that's what's happening now. I think he's got the swing speed down. He's feeling good about how quickly he's able to get the bat there. And now he's like, when do I start it to get my barrel in position to hit the ball over the fence? And that's what he's struggling with. He's mishitting balls that he wasn't used to mishitting. He looks really frustrated about it because he loves hitting this guy. But I would say if I'm a Cardinals fan, this is really encouraging because there's a chance in the next 2 to 4 weeks that he just goes off like everything.
Right. And this is better than the beginning of the season when he said, I hate my swing. I've lost my swing. He's also swinging 68 miles an hour, so there's nothing to hold on to. At least here, you'd be like, okay, he's got some speed back. Maybe he can get the timing back. Yeah.
Yeah. The thing that's interesting too, if you look at where Arenado's hitting his home runs this year, they're not as tightly clustered to the left. There's a few that are more like center, close to center at least. So that would kind of be that visual proof, like, hey, the timing is different right now. He's still looking for that, but just having more bat speed, it makes you think there is something still left in the tank. Whereas back in April and May, we were wondering if it was the beginning of the end for a great player and maybe a quicker decline than we had previously expected. So nice to see him turning things around.
And there's another inquisitive guy that cares a lot.
Wow. I mean, I'll give him that.
Wow, where'd that come from?
I have no idea. But he's another inquisitive guy that like studies swings and cares a lot, and so I'm not too surprised to see another act, but I do wonder how it goes from here.
So I guess that's our cue to go. Tech seems like it's starting to break down because we're running a little bit long. If you'd like a subscription to The Athletic, you can get one for $2 a month at theathletic.com/rates and barrels. You can find us on Twitter. Trevor is at I am Trevor May. Eno is at Eno Saris. I am at Derek Van Riper. The pod is at Rates and Barrels. Shout out to our producer, Brian Smith, for putting this episode together. That is going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We're back with you on Friday.
Thanks for listening.